Hey, thanks for being a part of the conversation. Let's do some pod crashing. Episode number 313 is with Tiffany D. Cross from the podcast Across Generations.
Hi there. I'm excellent. Very happy to be in conversation with you. How are you?
Oh, you're using my favorite word, excellent, because anybody who uses that word lives that word.
Well, I try to. I certainly try to.
Tiffany, I'm very proud of you with this podcast, and here's the reason why. One of the things that I've struggled with for so many years is that the Native American culture can't get the younger people to tell the story of the elders. And so when you sit down and you talk with these family members and you talk about your grandfather and your father, it's like, my God, you are preserving something that someone is going to find in 20 years, and they're going to go, thank you, Tiffany. Now I know more about my family.
This is the entire point, or you completely get it. It is an audio and visual time capsule because storytelling in so many communities of color are so important. And so how fortunate are we that we get to worship at wisdom of the elders before they join the ancestors and get all the life advice and guidance on this trail, this journey that we're all on. And I was looking at the landscape of younger people and people middle-aged and people older, and I've consistently thought we need to capture this. My friends joke with me because if I'm in a room with any elder, I'm going to get that life story.
Yep.
Whether we're related or not, I want to know what wisdom do you have to offer me? Because no matter how precocious you are or how mature you think you are, nothing can substitute actual days spent on this earth. And so this is such a close personal project to me. But what I hope is that other people will listen to it and the conversation will continue. Because these are 30-minute episodes on the show. And obviously, you can't get all the life advice in 30 minutes. So I hope that people will walk away. It's a show that centers women, but I hope men listen and boys listen because I want these conversations to continue long after we're off the air.
Well, see, I expect a lot more guys doing that because you know what? They didn't ask their mothers the questions and they didn't ask their sisters the questions. And so what you're doing is you're planting seeds and you're also leaving breadcrumbs for guys to say, okay, I get it. I get it.
I hope so. I hope beyond the breadcrumbs, but the seed that you talked about, I hope it blossoms into other conversation and other dialogue that we have with each other. We talk about everything on the show. Or I have to tell you, I am completely unfiltered. I come from a news background. And so people see me behind an anchor desk and I've always been myself. But on this one, I am telling all my business. And so it's too late now because it's shot. So I can't go back. But I think about some of the things I say. I'm like, oh, my God, my mom is going to see this show. But we are talking about our changing perspectives on sex. What does a 20-something feel about sex versus an 80-something or a 60-something? What do you wish you knew about money? And nobody's a financial expert, but just living. So if you're in your 60s and 70s looking at your finances, what is something that you wish you knew? What would you tell your 20-something? And then I think every generation morphs into, you kids don't know good music. And so when I found myself doing that, I felt too young to do that, but I find myself doing that. We even talk about how has music changed? R&B used to have such credo in the Black community in particular. Yes. It was kind of our soundtrack for life. And now when I hear some of these lyrics and they're so raunchy and they're all about sex, it takes a 20-something to call us out and say, well, you guys had raunchy music too. So the conversations that we have so much in our family, we pull them together. And maybe the conversations we're not having in our family, we pull them together and we put them out there. And I very much understood this would not work if I myself were not willing to be completely unfiltered and completely vulnerable in what I shared about my own personal life, my family life, my insecurities, my stresses, my sadness, as it relates to every part of my life. I had to put that out there. And what I found, the more vulnerable I was, the more vulnerable my guest was. Because each week I have an older woman and a younger woman, and the conversations that we have must be rich and open and unfiltered. And those two seats will always alternate. I'm the only constant. So it's a different older woman, a different young woman. And every time, if I am unfiltered, so too are they. So I know I have to just let go of it all. And I hope in that vulnerability, it will encourage other people to be open and unfiltered in their private conversations that they have in their group chats with their sisters, cousins, mothers, brothers, sisters, etc.
But see, this is what I love about it, Tiffany, is that I'm tired of the texting. I'm tired of speaking to people on the Visiphones and things like that. I want to hear conversation. And that's what you're bringing back to this. It's like we're physically having a conversation. And I just happen to be in the front seat of my car, part of this conversation.
Absolutely. And you are speaking my language but we're of a certain age. So I do try to remember that. But we didn't grow up with smartphones.
No.
Our entire communication did not exist in a DM. And so even that, or I look at young people and how they ask each other to dances, how they engage. It is always a written word, so much to the point that I sometimes feel like, do you understand there's a human being on the other side of this? They're not an avatar. This is a real live actual person. And that's why I knew this show would not work if it were done via Zoom. Like, we literally create a living room. We create the comfortable space of being at your grandmother's kitchen table or sitting around with family. And we're saying, hey, you guys pull up a chair and come be a part of this conversation with us. And I think that is so important. It's funny to me that younger people don't know how to write cursive anymore.
No.
I guess they don't need to because they have computers. That's fine. There's always evolution. What we cannot completely evolve from, though, is the art of conversation, the art of relating to each other as human beings. And I'll tell you how this translates into other parts of our lives. Like, we talk about sex, right? And with younger people, imagine being a curious little boy and you've been able to grow up with everything you wanted to know right at your fingertips about sex. And it's translated into some of these 20-somethings where sex is something that young men consider they do to a woman and not with a woman. And if that key piece of how we relate to each other is something that we can't even fully wrap our arms around, then what else is falling by the wayside? And how do we bring that kind of evolution to a screeching halt and say, wait a second, guys, we are still thinking, feeling human beings, and let's not lose our humanity in this here society, despite what we see all around us. So I really hope, look, we're talking about funny things on this show. We're talking about thoughtful things on this show. We're talking about sad things on this show. We're open with all the topics, but I really do hope that it casts a wide net of influence on, at the end of the day, just how we relate to each other, how we love each other, because that is our superpower in so many communities. So I really hope people watch it. I Heart Podcast. But also they can watch on YouTube. And just to our point, or like, it's when you listen, it's one thing. When you watch, it's another. Both are equally important. And I'm doing this with Will Packer. Will Packer Productions. He's a Hollywood mogul at this point, a producer whose films have grossed more than $1 billion worldwide. So he's the one behind Girls Trip. And so many of your other favorite films. So many people came around to make sure that this seed blossomed into a beautiful garden. So we're still growing. And I invite you, your family, everybody who's listening, I invite you guys all to come plant a seed in this garden and subscribe, drop a comment, let me know what you think. And let me know who you want to hear from, because this isn't a celebrity-driven guest show either, Earl. I have to tell you. We did have Dionne Warwick on the premiere.
Yes, you did.
But, there are people, there are grandmothers, like we have like just that old Black woman in the community in the Bronx who just loved everybody's kids and adopted kids. And, like she's not a household name, yet when you see her, you know her. She is the familiar neighborhood matriarch. And it's not a celebrity, but the conversation is just as rich. I wanted to make sure that this wasn't celebrity driven, that people would just show up for the conversation.
Real people.
So we'll have a little bit of both.
One of the things that I love about working with the younger generation, I had a first year college student yesterday come up to me. He's got an interview today, and he goes, I don't know how to talk with people. And I went, of course you don't. I said, that's your generation. And I said, what you need to do is you need to take the attention off yourself and give it to them. Let them ask them the questions so that you can become a part of their journey. Remember, it's their job they have open. You don't have that job. They're coming to get you. So now you've got to be a part of them. And they don't know how to speak that language.
I think that's so key. Like I said, the art of conversation. And then, again, I hate sounding like the get off my lawn older person, but also just centering yourself in humility. And I want to, in this show, I want everyone to feel like you have a voice and your voice deserves to be heard. So we're not there to just admonish the 20-something who's a part of the conversation, because quite frankly, sometimes the 20-something has something to teach me. They have something to teach me about work-life balance. It would not have occurred to me in my 20s to tell, an older person to even say the phrase, it didn't even exist, work-life balance. But there is something, it's not a badge of honor to work 18 hours a day for 30 years, and wait till you're in your 50s or 60s to live life. So I do listen to them and hear from them. And I think their perspectives are important. So it is that unique balance of center yourself in humility and learn from the elder on the panel.
Yeah.
But I too center myself in humility and understand that life is a journey and I don't have it all figured out. And while I have wisdom to impart on a 20 something, I have something to learn from a 60 something or 70 something on the panel. I also equally have something to learn from the 20 something. So I'm very open in that regard. So I don't want the young people to think that we're just sitting there like, you kids don't know how life was. It's not that. We're saying, tell me your perspective. Tell me what we're missing about your generation, because maybe in this learning, it will, change how we view life and change how we communicate. So it really is an equal, healthy exchange of ideas, ideology, and just life and just sisterhood. There's something that happens. I don't know how it is with men. I throw this question back to you, actually. When women are at a table, there is magic. There is a spirit of sisterhood immediately. If one man pulls up a seat at that table, the dynamic shifts. Not necessarily like, ew, get out of here. But it's known that, our counterpart is here. And in this, we are just women, and there's a level of comfortability that produces from that. Is it the same with men? If it's a table full of men and I come pull my chair up, does the dynamic change? And if so, for the better or for the worse?
Oh, I'll tell you what happened. You're absolutely right, because then they think that the openness is gone. Then this way they kind of clam up just a little bit. But I have the courage to say, listen, I'm one of you. Okay, we all work together. We're all a family together. Whatever the conversation is, if you were out there in the fields of Montana, what would you use as your words? And I said, that's what we have to do as this circle, because it's going to make us tighter when we use our own street speak.
And I'm happy to hear you say that. I think that's very true. And it's just as it's important for us to have our spaces, it's also important for men to have their spaces to talk. For this, though, I would say to the men listening, you get to eavesdrop on unfiltered conversation by these women and hopefully learn from it. I think everybody on Instagram these days is some sort of relationship expert. I'm exhausted with it. Some of these posts of like, don't let these random who knows who you are people talk you out of accountability and relationships. So we don't focus all of our shows on man-woman relations, but we do with some. But we also talk about mommy issues and our relationship with our mothers and our daughters. Yes. And so I hope men also listen to this. You don't have to be a member of this community to get something out of it. So I hope everybody pulls up a seat to this table and just learn. And honestly, even if you're not a Black woman, there's still something you can learn from it, because we are more alike than we are different. And you might have some curiosity about your fellow countrymen and say, wow, this is something that is credo in this community, but this is also credo in my specific household. Yeah. And I want to know more about this conversation. So I really hope people will subscribe, download. I am supposed to not look at comments, but I'm going to tell you something that my agent and team probably don't want to hear. I look at every comment. I don't care if it's 1,500 comments. I'll sit there and read them all. So it really is an interactive conversation, because I want people to be a part of it.
I've made it a part of my path that when I'm in a grocery store and I see a grown man with their children shopping with the girls or even the little guys, I make it a point to go up to them and thank them, because I didn't have that as a child. My father never took me to a grocery store, because I think that the landscape for men is changing. So maybe one time, how about a stay-at-home father who's taking care of his kids have a conversation with other mothers?
At 100%. And I'll tell you, on an episode that's available now, we actually talk about gender roles. Good. And how gender roles have changed. Because you think about, listen, my grandfather didn't lift a finger when he walked in the house. My grandmother had his dinner ready. She plated his meal for him. When he was done, she got that plate. Kitchen was clean. Put the little nightlight on in the kitchen, the dish towel over the sink. That meant kitchen closed for business. Now, women are working. It takes a two-income household sometimes when you're raising children. Sometimes women are out earning their counterparts. They cannot be this, amalgam of June Cleaver and Claire Huxtable all into one. Like, they have to be breadwinners and also do child rearing. And sometimes men have to pick up in areas where previously they didn't in other generations. Sometimes men are the ones cooking the dinners. Sometimes men are staying home, taking care of their children, to your point. So I think that is such an important conversation as well. And hearing from women who did that. And maybe some of those women feel like, well, we didn't have a choice. Like we were growing up in the 60s and 70s, and we did not have the option to work. But in all transparency, I will tell you, in different points in my career, when I was exhausted and working those 18-hour days, I would on occasion think, who the hell were these loudmouth feminists talking about let us go to work? Put me in the kitchen and let me cook a meal and take care of somebody's kids. This career was my backup plan. but honestly, I'm so thrilled with the way life worked out, because this is truly my calling. It's truly the place where I feel the most at home. Having these types of conversations. So I'm actually very, very happy with the journey that life has set me on now.
I'm at that generation where my mother was the one that cooked for my father. And I think the reason why my marriage has lasted 32 years is because I remind my wife, you're not my mom. We're going to work on this together.
Wow.
We're going to clean the house together. We're going to do everything together. And right there in the very beginning, I was always accused of being codependent. No, I wasn't. I just didn't want her to be my mother.
Wow. Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Forgive me, because I'm an interviewer as well. This is your show. But can you tell me what was the most challenging time in your marriage, and what was the best time in your marriage?
Understanding that being Arrow on the radio is not Arrow at home. And I had to create the two separate personalities, because she loved the guy at home, the guy on the radio, she supported him. And so the two different lifestyles, I had to learn how to deal. I had to like myself. And because I didn't, I was in love with Arrow. Arrow was having fun on the radio, but the guy at home, no, what are you doing, dude? Do something.
Wow. Yeah. I completely get that. And I'll tell you, based on your answer, we have a lot of conversations about self-love. We had Madam Royalty, Dionne Warwick, on the show, and we talked about the dynamic between men and women. And she said, well, first you have to love yourself,
yes.
Which sounds like an easy thing. If you ask me now, do you love yourself? Yeah, of course I love myself. But when you look at your behaviors and you say, is this the behavior? Does a person who loves themselves stay in an environment where they are not welcome or valued? And then it becomes a little more complicated of an answer, right? And I've certainly done that in relationships and personal relationships, professional relationships, job environments. I was staying in a place where I wasn't valued. And so loving yourself is taking down bricks and sometimes rebuilding yourself brick by brick. I will let you in on a little secret. This was really my genius way to have therapy for free. I'm sitting there talking about all my issues, and I get to hear different perspectives. Yep. I just happen to do it in front of an audience.
Oh my God.
It really is open.
That's the reason why when they'll write me a letter saying, hey, do you want to talk to such and such psychologist about his latest book? Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
About his book and some other things.
That's
absolutely.
Right. Where can people go to find out more about what you're doing, Tiffany? Because you talk about your broadcasting career. There's more than just a podcast in your life.
Yes, so they can follow me on all my socials. My handle is at Tiffany D. Cross. I joke and tell people the D stands for dime piece, but it's at Tiffany D. Cross is my middle initial. And they can find this podcast on YouTube at Across Gen Podcast, also on iHeart Podcast or wherever you get your podcast, and it's called Across Gen Podcast. And I'm very interactive with my viewers and audience, always has been. So always have been, rather. So I really invite people to join, be part of this conversation. And I'm not so inaccessible. I like having an interactive conversation. And I love talking to you this morning. So this has been really, really amazing. So thank you so much. I've been thrilled. This has been a little piece of therapy and relationship guidance, too, with what you talk about your marriage. So thanks for being so open with me as well.
Absolutely. One final question for a younger person you're going to invite. And I would love to hear what the elder would say. How are you going to survive with no TikTok?
Oh, listen, that is a whole conversation. We've been having this conversation about social media. I wonder what would happen if all of it went away.
Yeah.
The challenge with that is social media has democratized who has a voice. And so many communities of color have been summarily dismissed when it comes to mainstream media. And so I do worry about that. But for just in the very narrow perspective of how will you survive and how will you communicate, I think that part is a good thing because it forces you to relate to other people. Yeah. I do, however, understand the other side of that challenge, which is it's revenue generating for some people. And again, it's given some people a platform and voice where they would not otherwise have one. So that's quite the quagmire that I cannot solve in the next 30 seconds. I'm not that brilliant, unfortunately.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has really been a great conversation. Thanks so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.